expert classes.
What's up guys, my name is Patrick Foley. I'm a 3D artist and I'm here with the Desire Company. And we're gonna show you how to make a 3D still life using Cinema 4D. It looks abstract and realistic at the same time. All you need is Cinema 4D, Octane, of course a computer, a screen, a computer chair, a mouse, keyboard, and your imagination. So we got a blank scene here and I'm actually gonna change my layout to my Octane model layout, so I got a bigger space to work with. And from here, I'm just gonna go and try to make some cool geometry. So usually I like to start off with a primitive, like a sphere. Obviously we have our segments here. If we go to display hidden line, and what we can do is just right off the bat, take a cloner and drop this inside the cloner. So now we have about 9 of them right now. And so what we can do is create more on the y-axis, and we can see that it already looks kind of cool, but not much going on here. So what we want to do is create a random effector, and as you can see, it did a little bit, it randomized them a little bit, but we can enable scale, uniform scale, and when we change this, we're randomizing the scale of all these things. That's really good because we're going to be morphing all of these pieces of geometry into one soon. So before we do that, we're going to want to make sure this thing is looking in tip-top shape. So we can grab one of these guys here, kind of get them all together. So if you just want to think about smushing all of these guys together as one to create something abstract, that's exactly what we're going for. This looks kind of cool. Let's maybe add another layer there. Change the random effector, maybe randomize the proportions a little bit more on the z-axis. Let's get these guys smushed together. And to me, this kind of looks cool. So essentially what we want to do is, instead of having all of these be separate pieces of geometry, we want these things to be in one. So the next thing we'll do is hop these guys into the volume builder and mesher. From then on, we're just going to merge them all together. So very simple. All we have to do is create the volume builder and the volume mesher. And so we have those here in our hierarchy. And to take the cloner, we want to drag that as a child of the builder. And nothing happens, as you can see. But we're going to want to take the builder and make that a child of the mesher. And now you can see all these things are kind of merged together, and we can manipulate the voxel range threshold to kind of make these things bulge or go inside and manipulate that a little bit more. But to change the resolution or voxel size, we'll want to manipulate just that, the voxel size. So we can take this down, it'll be denser and denser, or we can move them up and kind of lose resolution and make them a little bit more smooth. But I like to keep it in that kind of middle ground range, like 10 for now. And these are all kind of merged together. And something I like to do is kind of a little trick is just take a smoothing effector and drag that in between the mesher and the builder. As you can see, that does exactly what it says it does, smooths them out. Cool thing about that is we can now take the random effector that we used before and still take full advantage of that. So if you go to the effector, take the seed and randomize that as many times as you need to create some cool abstract formations. Something like that looks kind of cool. Let's keep going. Very cool. All of these, you really can't go wrong with any of these, but I kind of like this one. So we're gonna stick with this guy. What we'll actually do here is create a camera just so we can see what viewpoint we're gonna be looking at. And so what we're gonna do is Shift C and just type Octane camera, and that'll create us a camera here. And then we're gonna hop inside the camera and zero out the coordinates, all of them. And then we should just theoretically be able to take the z-axis all the way back, just like that. And now this is gonna be our camera angle. And a lot of times it's kind of hard to see where the bounding box is for the camera. So what we can do is Shift V, go to Safe Frames, and drag this opacity to 100. Now we can see the aspect ratio of this file. If we're not happy with the way this is showing up, we can just rotate this whole volume mesher to our liking. So that looks pretty good. I like that. Compositionally, it looks all right. And right there, we got our base object, but we want to kind of tear into this and make this a little bit more abstract. So what we're going to do is go into the volume builder, go to Object, Signal Distance Field, all the way down to Fog. As you can see, that did a little bit, but we're not there yet. So we're going to go Create Field, Shader Field. What that's going to do is when you drag that on top of the cloner, you're gonna go back to our volume builder and take the shader field from normal to minimum and creation space box to objects below. So everything below the shader field is going to be affected by the noise we apply to it. And so when we go to the shader field, we just go to shader, noise. As you can see, something's going on here, but that noise is way too small. So we're gonna wanna go to the noise and take the global scale up. And as we do that, you can see what's happening. It's totally deforming our shape here. So if we deactivate the shader field versus activate it, it's cutting away at this piece using the noise. And that's really cool. So we're gonna go and change the noise type a little bit until we see something we like. And we may have to take the high clip and bring it down, because a lot of these noises we'll have to manipulate and they're all different. So this one, we'll wanna take that high clip and bring it back up, and then take the global scale up a little bit, I think. And change the random seed. I think with this, we'll actually want to change the relative scale. So let's go to 50, 100 to 1,000 on the Y. I think on the Z, we'll go 50 as well. Take the 50 down to 40, maybe 20. And you can see already, we're getting some really cool looking noise patterns here. And all it's doing is cutting away at this original object that we had. So that looks pretty good there. And we can take the voxel range threshold, manipulate that a little bit, take the smoothing off and see how that looks. I actually might think I don't need the smoothing anymore because of the way this shader field is eating away at what we have. And so I kind of like this whole vibe we got going here. It's kind of eating away at this thing on kind of the diagonal axis. And I think that looks good. And the rest of the things we can do are pretty simple. All we have to do is if we can just take this really rigidy geometry here and add objects that kind of work well but contrast as well. So create maybe a sphere here. Take the segments up to like 40. Make another one, put it around here. And I copied that just by holding down Control. Drag that in the crevices just like this. Maybe have one floating. Create a bigger one. Compositionally, something like that. And maybe create one that kind of comes outside and is maybe meshed within this stuff. And I think that looks pretty good. So we have this kind of cool abstract formation here. I think we can add a platform. So the platform I usually just use is a cylinder, kind of make it a little bit bigger. And if you go to the front view by clicking the middle mouse button, you can kind of drag this guy to be pretty right below this thing. So with the camera selected, we're gonna want to compensate for being so high up. We're gonna go down on the Y and then just tilt up. All we have to do now is change the segments from rotation. We can go 16 to about 60 and then create a fillet cap, which creates a bevel on this edge here, which will help with the lighting hitting off of the rim. We can make that a little bit bigger and drag that down. And I think that looks good. With this Octane camera selected, I think a focal length that'll work better is something like an 80 millimeter. And we can just compensate by moving back on the Z axis. So we're gonna go up, rotate down. It's just about getting this thing to look like it meshes well with the scene. And I think we're done here. Now we just have to light this and texture it. So I'm gonna go back to my other layout, which is my Octane render layout. And here we have our Octane panel. When we click render, you can see what's happening. Pretty cool, but we have to do a lot of work to it. So let's go to our Octane settings, go from direct lighting to path tracing. Max samples 50 for now, GI clamp 1. And that's good. Let's lock our composition and frame here. And what we wanna do is light this thing. So I think the easiest way to do this would be to just add some area lights where we think it belongs. So we're just gonna create an HDRI environment. And if you didn't see that there, all you have to do is Shift-C, type in HDRI environment, add that right there. And then we're going to add our own area light. And this is cool because this is where we really get to take full advantage of manipulating our scene with our lights. So we have a light here that we can manipulate from the front view, but it's facing the wrong way. So we want to rotate that 90 degrees. And right there. And we're going to place this, and you can see when I move this light, the shadows are dramatically changing with the scene. You know, knowledge with film helps with this aspect as well, because you can kind of adjust the shadows to your liking. And right now this looks like a really kind of cinematic scene that we got going on here, which is pretty cool. We got the nice shadows going on. I think what we can do now is duplicate this light and rotate it again 90 degrees. And this one kind of place above the scene. And that looks good for us right now. Let's increase the segments of this thing because we can kind of see some banding going on here. So we can go 60 to 120. And that looks pretty good. And before we get too far, we're gonna go to our camera tag, enable camera imager, and highlight compression. Take that all the way to the top. As you can see, it gives us a little bit more latitude while we're working. And I don't like how we're losing all our detail on the right here, so I'm just gonna take this secondary light, and what I'm gonna do is go to light settings, double-sided, so now it'll be emitting light from both sides, and if I duplicate that, it'll be creating light from the bottom as well. And now we can choose kind of where this rim light is being placed, and you can see when I move the light, it's changing the shadows dramatically. And I don't want this to be in frame, so all I have to do is change the visibility of the camera to none, and then maybe adjust the light, make it a little bit brighter here. So now we got some dramatic shadows, we got some cool objects going on here, and I think I want to make all of these spheres textured in a maybe glass texture. So what we're gonna do is create an octane specular material, which pretty much stands for glass in octane. So you're gonna drag that to these objects, and you can see it's reacting really well with the lights we have and really well with the surrounding geometry. So we're just placing these things where they belong. And we're gonna go to our texture node here of our specular, and we're gonna wanna make sure we go to the common tab and enable fake shadows. And that'll just help render these things to be a little bit more realistic. And the last thing we're gonna do is create a texture for this main object that we'll just drag on there. And right now, it just looks pretty low poly and weird because we don't really have any texture applied, but that is about to change. And what we wanna do is create an octane noise and a baking texture. We're gonna drag the noise to the texture. We're gonna wanna drag the displacement to a blank displacement node here. And with that, we're gonna drag this node all the way to the displacement. And you can see we're gonna be deforming the displacement. So I'm gonna change the level of detail to 4K. And we're gonna be getting more detail here in a second. So I'm gonna go to transform here, that'll be fine. And I'll wanna go to Perlin to turbulence. And now you can see we're getting something here. It's starting to deform this geometry a little bit. Before I go any further, I'm just gonna wanna go to this texture tag here and go from UVW mapping to cubic. Now you can see we're getting some really complicated looking textures here that look pretty abstract, but we're not quite done. So we're going to kind of deform this noise texture here just by going to UVW, transform. And once we have that, we can uncheck lock aspect ratio and take this to like 10. And we can take the Y value to about 0.5. And already we're getting something that looks pretty cool and pretty abstract, and I'm starting to get really happy with this. It almost reminds me of something floating in space. And the next thing we can do is just grab an octane glossy material and just drag that onto the platform just to get some nice reflections from everything else. And that in and of itself looks pretty cool and abstract. So just like that, we've only made this in a few minutes using lighting, area lights, texturing, displacement nodes, and pretty much all of that within a few minutes in Cinema 4D and Octane.